Good morning.
Hey, good morning, TJ. How are you?
Doing well, Drew. How are you?
I'm good. Tired, but good.
Yep, I feel that. It's been a full week
Hi, Drew.
for me,
Hi,
for
Zoe.
everybody. There's a lot going on in the world too. I know that's been
Yeah.
affecting my mental health quite a bit, as well as other people's. I'm sure people feel. I feel a little on edge just about the whole thing, to be honest.
I'm an empathetic person, and
Yeah.
just everything's got me really like mentally drained, probably exactly how you feel. Like it's on top of already a demanding schedule. And
Yeah.
then just being tired, mentally, physically, just exhausted.
I'm advocating for coach mental health days off. If you need one, take it. Make sure you get, your weekend into Saturday. One day off goes pretty quickly, so take advantage of it as much as you can. Try to get some extra sleep. If you can get the kids to give you a break, just do your best. That way, when you are showing up to support others, you can do so from a fresh place.
Hi, Nico. Nico's giving Virginia smoochies.
Yeah, pet your dog. Helps. Well, cool. I think it'll just be us and Kylie and Sarah today, Drew. Kristen is out. But yeah, awesome. We might as well just jump right in. Not too much banter today. Maybe stick to the script more or less. We wanted to, the script.
This is not a script. Yeah.
The outline.
We have an outline.
Well, Sarah, who is a wonderful coach,
Sarah.
but also one of Zoe's athletes, had a really incredible race over the weekend, finished first and beat a really strong professional runner in the process.
Beat all the men.
And all the dudes. So hell yes to that. We're going to take some time to, spotlight Sarah a little bit on this call. Recap with her how the race went, her preparation, maybe talk a little bit about her mindful approach to her race day preparation, training and racing itself. I know just by following Sarah along on social media and Fireweed and all of that, that she, utilized a really awesome set of like mindfulness tools to help her through the event. So really interested in diving in a little bit with that.
A cold weather vertical event, which oh God, that's a lot to manage. But I feel like also this is where Sarah's, a lot of her very specific things that I didn't worry about as a coach. I'm like, okay, she's she's got kind of the mom swag of if I was stranded on a desert island with Sarah, I know that she would have brought snacks enough for everyone and layers. She's just got you covered. So I know that she has herself covered. So all the stuff that would make me extremely anxious about this event, I feel like Sarah's just got it. So I'm excited to hear kind of how she, and I'm sure it's not as simple as that either, but I'm stoked to learn about how she managed that, because I get real anxious having to do or not real anxious, but I don't love even just running around town when it's cold enough to have to wear leggings.
Yeah, Zoe, maybe you could ask Sarah a couple questions. I know you mentioned quite a few really amazing points in your Rad Weekend update for Sarah for this week, and I felt like that could be, I don't know, just a nice jumping off point to ask Sarah some questions about, how she felt like her training went leading up to this, maybe some things that she's done differently this time around compared to, in other events and things like that. And I don't know, I'm just really curious to see, what changes have been happening for Sarah, like over time.
Yeah, I think like from coach perspective, something that we worked on a good bit was like not going out and trying to necessarily chase vert, because where she lives near Boulder is not necessarily like, it's not super dry, not all the trails are in, but we did try to do some really intentional focused uphill efforts in the form of uphill tempos, particularly during long runs. So like making the legs turn over going uphill even when tired. And then additionally tiring out the legs a little bit and then making her finish a long run on, slightly more tired legs, but really trying to, instead of like reinforcing like uphill slogitude, really trying to like make her body run strong uphill and like practicing that super, super intentionally. But not necessarily like, again, even though it's like a really steep, right? Like it's a pretty vertical race, you run up for air. Not hitting that over the head too much, and still continuing to focus on economy. And I'd love to know how that felt for Sarah. And she also, we had some like kind of like not quite injury, but some like body challenge mitigation going on. And I think Sarah handled that really well, working with her PT, pulling back when we needed to. Yeah, I don't know, Sarah. I'd love to know like kind of how the training, like how that story played out for you and like where you started to feel confident. Like, again, something that I always like to work with athletes on after races. I'm like, how do we break this down into a start, stop, continue, or like rosebud thorn? Like what's working well? What do we need to do more of? What are we going to start doing? What are we going to stop doing? Like what didn't work? Deprioritize, get that out of my mind. And what are we going to continue doing?
Yeah. That's a lot.
That's a lot.
So, so the train, when I first started with Microcosm, like my story was like, I loved the big winter days with my friends, like slogging all the time. And I remember like very early on in the process, wanting to do like beer stat on a Saturday, and Zoe being like, probably be better to just like run on this Saturday if we're trying to build your running.
Consider not doing a 14er.
Like, but this is like my thing, and I'm not able to do my thing, and feeling like frustrated with that. And now like this went, I did 90% of my runs on the Boulder Creek path. Like just on this path, it was the only thing that was dry. And I was like, okay with that. I didn't feel resentful about it, because I knew like when the trails were dry, I would have fun on them and get what I could out of them. And it would be like a great use of my time. But like mostly I was like, certainly on the weekdays, I was running my runs. And so like that meant either, a treadmill or dry trail if I could find it. Sometimes it meant slick sidewalk near my house or something like that with the yak tracks, but not really very often. So that was a big shift. I used to be like, well, it says 16 miles. And so I'm going to go and spend 6 hours slogging through snow, which was like not actually the intention of the workout. Right. And so I think I understand, the why behind the workouts, and then try to take that into, planning the route or whatever. So there were some weekend runs, like I had a 5-hour effort that was on trail, and it was snowy conditions, some icy conditions. And I thought that was good, because that was probably realistic to what I'd see on race day, because I was going to be doing trail winter conditions. So it's like important to get some of that, but not too much. And like, frankly, like, I think I used to also really like disrupt my family weekends, trying to get some of that specificity on trail. And like this year, I really haven't done that. I'm like, well, like I could drive up to Boulder and get on trail, or I could like get this road run in 2 hours from my house. And like, that gives me the rest of the afternoon with the family. So, I think it really has been a big shift in like, I'm still doing my runs. I'm still showing up for my workouts. I'm still prioritizing running, but like, I'm also prioritizing all the other things in my life. And I think that really helped. And then, yeah, the injury piece, like that happened. I did this treadmill workout in Miami. So Miami was like this horrible week where I didn't hit any of my workouts and I was feeling really low, but I did go out every single day, but like every day I didn't complete the workout. And that was like a low week emotionally, because I was like, I'm going to sea level and it's gonna be so great. And I'm gonna like crush these runs. And then I've, walked every run, hated the humidity. And then I ended up on a treadmill and then got pretty wrecked from that treadmill run. It was like a hill workout on a treadmill, a speed workout on a treadmill. It wasn't a great idea. My body's not used to treadmills. And so that derailed me, but I just took some days off and just like, it hurts, or I'll run until it hurts and then I'm not going to run anymore. And so that meant like my 16-mile long run ended up being a 10-mile long run. And, that feels like a really big difference, but trusting that, I've been running for years now and like, I could have done 16. I'm capable of doing 16 just because I didn't hit that number on that day. Like I did what I could do. So just a lot more acceptance with, how I'm showing up. And like when I don't fit it all in, I've been much more like, I definitely never hit the high end of my mileage. So every Friday I have the option of cross training or 4 miles. And I don't think I've ever, done the 4 miles. Sometimes I just forget that I have the option on Fridays because it's a new thing. But also I'm just like, I don't ever feel like running on Fridays. So I don't, and I feel okay with that. I don't need to hit the high end of the mileage. And so then in terms of mindfulness preparation, like first mindfulness for preparation, so really like exploring my fears. So this was a 24-hour run on trail, started at 6 p.m. And it was like -12 degrees at some point. So very cold. So, a lot of fear about like animals in the night, wildlife, just being alone. Like it was not a full moon by any means. My equipment freezing and not having light, my food, my water bottles freezing, which like absolutely happened all night. And so all of these things I like sat with and examined and explored. So at first, somebody says, well, what are you worried about this race? I'm like, oh no, it's going to be great. Like everything's going to be fine. I'm excited about it, which is like the instinct to say like, no, it's cool. I've got it. And then, I challenge myself to think, well, what really am I afraid of? Because this is a big thing, it's like, I'm out in the wilderness alone. I mean, I'm really alone. And so allowing myself to be honest that like, I am afraid and this is scary and it like, there are risks involved. And then taking that information and planning. So buying insulated water bottles and finding out that Scratch has this amazing hot apple cider drink that if you use hot water, it is like, if anybody's running a winter race, I highly recommend it. It was very tasty. It's got 80 calories and electrolytes, and like definitely was really important part of my evening. And then like backup battery, I just took each of my fears and then tried to recognize, what of these fears are things that I can manage or control? Are there things I can invest in or strategies that I can have? And then, I address those. And then some of the things like, no, like they're right. Like there are mountain lions in this part of the state. And like, I can't control that. That's not a thing I can control. And I'm going to be running at dusk and dawn, right? Like those are also things I cannot control, and I will be alone. And so I just had to recognize that like there were going to probably be times during my race where I would feel afraid. And then just know that and accept it and have some plans for, how I will move forward and not, typically my fear response is to freeze. So when I'm strategizing how I'm going to manage anxiety out on the race course, I'm thinking about moving forward because in all likelihood, what would happen to me would be that I would just panic and stop and wait for somebody to come by. But so I explored all those things ahead of time and just like allowed myself to sort of anticipate the fear. So that way, if I experienced the fear in the trail, it would potentially be less impactful because I've sat with that feeling before and my body is now more comfortable with the feeling because of that work that I've done. And then, in terms of mindfulness during race day, really just turning to that, like present moment awareness, like really into counting to 7, my footsteps, like that would be great. So I'm really proud of my eating, during this race, like nailed it. Kylie would be so proud. Like, every 30 minutes, I was eating a gel. I had my my scratch, which had the calories in it. And then when I got back to the tent, I was eating a lot. But so that really gave me things to focus on. So it was literally just like hyper focus on getting to the next place where I would eat a gel, and knowing exactly where on the trail that was. And really tuning into the present moment, and then things like noticing when I became emotional, right? So like, of course that happened after many hours and getting tired and different feelings coming up. I was cold, like going out for my last night loop. I cried because I was just like, I don't want to do this. Like, I don't have any desire to leave this heated tent with people and food and go out into negative 12 degrees by myself in the dark and have to work, right? And so I was emotional. So one, I let myself have those feelings, said what I was feeling, cried for 30 seconds and said, this sucks, felt it. And then I recognized like, okay, my sympathetic nervous system is like, in overdrive here. So I'm taking some deep breaths. I'm recognizing that there's an emotional piece to this that's not based on my actual experience. And then the other piece was my default mode network. So that part of your brain that's like your storytelling brain, when that would start to get activated. So I get passed on the downhills. I'm so terrible at downhills. This is going to be my thing. It doesn't matter how hard I work these uphills, I can never make up for how much people pass me on the downhills. As soon as I get past, I'm like in this slump with this story about how much I suck at downhills. So then I'm like, oh, I'm telling myself a story. That's my default mode network, which of course is activated because I'm not doing anything, which is when that mode is activated. So when we're running, the primary thing happening in our brain is this story, right, running in the background. And so it's catching, so using mindfulness to catch that story taking place and then tell myself a different story or change it. So I think I answered the primary questions you guys.
You nailed that. So much good information there. And I hope everybody listening and who's going to listen later will, just be able to take some interesting bits of information out of there. A few things that resonated with me were normalizing your fears and your feelings. I think that's really important. It's, when you're running out in the backcountry, when you're out there alone, this is something that I can definitely relate to. I get really nervous about wildlife encounters. And in like being in a remote area, get really nervous about things like that. And I think that like in the process of normalizing these things, we can sort of confront how we're feeling and kind of come to a place of more balance or centeredness. So you can actually go out there and approach it a little bit more logically, which for me, I find is an important process. As we discussed in past calls, the logical approach isn't for everybody. Another thing that I'm hearing, kind of like the acceptance around imperfect training leading up to an event. I think this is something that also is just like so important to normalize with the team, because no matter like how well or how derailed the training is leading up to a race, like we're in charge of our own stories. So we can still go out there and make the best of race day. And so when your training goes perfectly, there's no guarantee that your race will. And when your training goes imperfectly, there's no guarantee that your race won't go really well. And so if we jump to conclusions, extrapolate from kind of those experiences, and then say, well, this is how things are going to go based on these facts, sometimes we end up putting a barrier kind of in place that affects how we actually do on race day. As coaches, I know we've all seen athletes who it's like, whoa, wow, I'm extreme. Like that race went really, really well. I'm surprised because your training wasn't that good. And there's also been situations where it's like, wow, I just don't have an explanation for why that race didn't go your way because you absolutely nailed your training. And sometimes that's part of the process. And so I like hearing when athletes kind of have that acceptance going into an event, like my training was great. My training, maybe lacked a few things that I can work on later, but this is the day. I have to let this day unfold. I'm going to write the story moment to moment rather than, pre-write my log entry about how the day didn't go well because my training wasn't, where it should have been. And I think that like right there, that lesson for athletes, super, super important. To me, that relates directly back to that idea of the infinite mindset where, every day we're starting from kind of this zero mentality and we're writing our own story moment to moment. So those are a couple of things that really, just stood out to me. Hope it did for you guys too.
Yeah. And even though Sarah's training wasn't necessarily like picture perfect, the deeper context of that is that like 99% of the time she shows up, gets it done, right? Like, it's not like, oh, it was like such a cluster fudge and she succeed. Like for years, her training has been rock solid. Imperfect, yes, but like rock freaking solid. And that's really where you see this stuff start to come out as like, yeah, you can have like an injury setback and like, yeah, you can miss a couple long runs training for a 24-hour event when you just have like years of really hard work behind you. So like, I don't want to like, the narrative again, like, yes, imperfect training, but like with the deeper background of like, a lot of really good training too.
Well, I think that kind of goes back to this point that this isn't about perfection. Excuse me. This isn't about perfection. This is about progress. And so when you zoom out and you look at things in terms of like, Sarah's really good at showing up. She gives herself the best chance she can every day to do the work. And that's like 99% of this process. Like those workouts or long runs that like you really nail, like that's great. Hell yes to that. But really that's just like, that just gives you like a little extra motivation to get back out there like the next week to stack those bricks again and to do the work again. It makes the process like a little bit more sustainable. But what we're really looking at is just being really good at showing up. Like if you get out there and do like the minimum of your mileage range,
oh yeah,
most 99% of the time, and only once in a while you get your extra Friday run in, or you do like 10 miles instead of 8. Yeah, like you might have a few extra points going into that race, but that's not what our focus is. Our focus is on that, like the fact that you completed the range of miles, somewhere in the range of miles 99% of the time, and you gave yourself that chance, and that stuff really, really adds up. Yeah. Especially when you're looking at things in terms of like years rather than just like a couple of weeks strung in a row or a few months strung in a row. When you're looking at that in terms of like 1 year down, 2 years down, getting into 3 years down, like that's when that consistency, it's like boom, then you have like a big breakthrough.
Yeah,
like
if you do the minimum amount of miles every day for years, you're going to be fine. Like, I never need to see Sarah run on a Friday, really, because I know that she's going to be out there 5 days a week, like no problem.
Yeah, and I do want to say that, Sarah, I think it's important also that you really normalize that. I think for a lot of people, and what you said, just realizing like it's okay that you don't do that optional Friday run. Like that doesn't.
Optional truly means optional.
like,
it's not a test.
Right, like
it's an option.
And the fact that you recognize that, and probably this is a part of being a mindful person, working on your mindfulness muscle, having the awareness that like Friday runs, they don't feel that great. I'd rather rest, and that rest allows me to elevate the quality of my weekend runs. I get more out of those runs. And just knowing when to hold yourself back a little bit too. This is something that I talked about a lot at the beginning of this year in my own training, and so can really relate, is to wanting to finish runs feeling good rather than eking out a couple extra miles that kind of didn't feel as good mentally or physically. And I think that's really important for athletes. So I'm just going to mention it again. Like, you've got that mileage range for a reason. Like, if you're not feeling that good at the end of 10 miles, maybe 8 miles is more appropriate. And so use that mileage range. Sarah, obviously, she did that really successfully in her training, and just having that extra mental capacity at the end of the day, it makes it a lot easier to get out the next day. And it's going to allow you to just show up to your race feeling a lot more mentally fresh. And so much of this is mental. We really can't kind of like overstate that. When you show up to these events and you're in a good frame of mind, you feel fresh mentally, you're able to go a lot farther than you think and push yourself a lot harder. You've kind of got this extra bandwidth to work with. Well, cool. I hope you guys enjoyed hearing a little bit from Sarah about that. I kind of wanted to regroup with her on this maybe one more time to talk about her process-oriented goals as well, because I think that could be interesting. I know a lot of you guys have, at least a lot of my athletes have been kind of reaching out for advice on creating process-oriented goals, since our previous call was about that. But we've got a few other things, so let's kind of we'll move the conversation forward. Maybe in the same vein, we'll talk a little bit about some wellness related questions to kind of start this next segment off. We had somebody write in, these are tips for finding the right balance of structure and rigidity and flexibility with goals and training. And so one of the questions is, how can I balance my training better with other things going on in my life? I would love to hear from like Kylie or Drew, maybe to start us off on this one. Balancing training with other things in life.
Yeah, I'd love to hear Drew.
I was gonna say I'll try to chirp in first here. It's difficult to balance life, especially when it's busy. You don't have to be like me and have multiple jobs and kids and all kinds of projects going on, including your own training. But what's helped me specifically with everything that's gone on is trying to prioritize just life in general. I'm a list person. I know that others aren't, for good reasons, but I like to make a list of the things that are important to me on a daily basis, almost like keeping like a planner or a schedule, where if I don't plan my runs, they just don't happen. If I don't plan my meals, they don't happen. It's just, everything has to be planned, almost to the point where I have to it's almost embarrassing at this point. And I know it'll get better, but I have to plan okay, from 7:30 to 8:30, I'm going to hang out with my wife for an hour and talk about our day and just hang out for a little bit. It's gotten to that point, but everything for me has to be planned. That can help me deal with stress. Sometimes I get stressed out when I am thinking I don't know when I'm going to fit my run in today, which probably means it's not going to happen. And when I don't run, I don't feel good, and I need to feel good because later today I've got a line review with a representative, and just it snowballs out of control. So that's kind of my tip, I guess, for balancing training. Yeah, I don't know. What do you think, Kylie? What helps you?
No, I'm similar in the respect of I've gotten in the habit of at the beginning of the day, like making a list of what the like MITs are, the most important tasks for the day are that need to get done. And I've also like blocked out time on my schedule for training. So I think, you know, there are things that are going to come up that might interrupt the schedule, but as far as, you know, training goes, or even like when I'm working with my athletes on nutrition, block out the time, because you know, it's harder to make excuses if you actually block that out for yourself, and thinking about like what your week entails ahead of time as well, like if there are certain events going on with kids, etc. You gotta kind of I think you have to think about it as like, what are my priorities, you know? If you're wanting to make running a priority and reach certain running goals, then making that like part of your schedule, I think is really important. So that's kind of, I mean, when I'm working with people, like the actual blocking out of time, I think is what I recommend. And then with the like same thing with nutrition, like nutrition should be part of your training or part of your week. So if you have that scheduled into your week to plan for 30 minutes, then it may not happen still, but at least it's on that calendar, and you can't say, oh, you know, I ran out of time, I can't focus on my nutrition or something.
Something that I've kind of struggled with is being okay with taking a few days off, where if life happens, which it does for all of us, we're all fortunate to have life happen, right? That I will get down on myself if I miss a scheduled run because just something came up, and trying to find this balance where you understand that it's okay to like miss a few days. Like Sarah mentioned in her deal, she needed a few days kind of just to like reset and like regroup before she got back on the horse again, so to speak. And balancing being okay with that, but also understanding that you can't have a 3-day rest window every week. You know, you got to be dedicated and you got to prioritize. And so, and I know that I'm not the only one that struggles with that, but that's kind of an ongoing thing. And like we've, you know, talked a lot here, scheduling has been a big help to me, trying to balance those two things.
I think like chatting with your coach too, I've done that before. I'll like message my coach like, hey, you know, I have a stressful day. Is it okay if like we switch these 2 days? And they're usually like, yeah, that's fine. But, you know, don't just get in the habit of switching things around on the schedule either, because we try to intentionally like include workouts and long runs and things on certain days. But I think, you know, if there is something particularly stressful, being okay with like asking your coach, that's what we're here for. And I will usually like look ahead and I'll be like, oh, I have this like kind of this busy day coming up too. So you can kind of look ahead sometimes. I know it gets busy last minute too, but just if you look ahead, sometimes you could always ask ahead of time too, like, hey, what could we do switch something up a little bit this week?
Yeah, something that I have been doing to kind of help make sure I can get stuff done that needs to get done is I make a not to do list for every day. That is like a tool that helps me not spend time on things that are like, I'll identify before I get going in the day when I have a clear head, like, do not do this, like, do not scroll on social media, do not obsess about analytics, do not waste time trying to like manage people's emotions via email, because I'll get like really bogged down trying to write like the nicest email ever to like a grown ass man, when that's just like a poor way. Like I should just be like, nope, deal, like however you feel about however I come across in this email, that's like on you, that's not on me to like take on the labor of managing how you feel about stuff. And I think a big reframe for me was like, as I kind of just grew in my athletic journey, being okay with owning it. And like, I used to feel like, oh, well, I'm not that good. So like, I have to really deprioritize the run, and I'll do it at like the end of the day when I don't, that way people don't have to rearrange anything for me. Now I'm like, no, like I'm going to set like, I have every day in my calendar something that auto syncs to my Slack channel where it just shows like an icon by my name of me running, so that people know like, oh, you don't message Zoe for these 2 hours a day, like no matter what, like that's Zoe's time. You do not get to schedule a meeting with her. You do not get to Slack her, because like that's her time and people can deal with that. It's only 2 hours. And like, I understand that not everyone has the ability to maybe have as much control over their schedule. But I think that if you allow yourself to really own your running, and then you make decisions accordingly, and you not try to minimize your own athletic journey, minimize the amount of space that it can take up, that can be a helpful reframe for folks. And again, like I acknowledge this comes from a place of like, I have the ability to just like take a 2-hour lunch break whenever, on most days, whenever I want.
Well, I mean, you start work at 6 and you end work at usually after 6. So I think I'm just going to back you up here. Any reasonable person would get 2 hours during their day to do something like that with that kind of schedule, which I think is too much.
I mean, it's not like, I do feel that it is earned, but I also understand that like the tips I'm giving are not appropriate or relevant for like everyone.
Totally. But I
like Drew can't just peace out in the middle of the day at a retail store.
No, but let me just jump in here. I think something that I'm hearing that everyone can relate to is don't minimize the importance of your athletic journey. If that's something that feels good to you, if that is something that relates to who you are, who you want to be, what you value, that's important. And so, when we relate that to how we prioritize things throughout the day, maybe you don't have as flexible of a job. And so that always has to be number one. But you can put running as number two, and that's okay. And so as soon as we say like, well, I'm not good enough to prioritize my running in that way, so I'm not going to run before I go to work, or I'm not going to schedule a run like I would a meeting. As soon as we say that kind of stuff,
I would get comfortable just like people would ask to do meetings during my running time, and I would actually be like, no, that's my time. We can do it a different time. If it totally didn't work for them, I am willing to I'm somewhat willing to compromise. But like, particularly if it's like a colleague that is a caretaker, that's something I'm always super flexible on. But like, if, I do also really try to like save that time. Like, I'm not going to just chat.
Right. But again, and it's not that you're not empathetic, even though I think you came across as rather strong at first, you are very empathetic. And so I know that you do make concessions based on each person that you work with.
But I also really do try to model for like my team. Like, now that I'm responsible for a team, I really try to like show that it's okay to take time for yourself and not compromise. Because I think like, as someone that really encourages the people that work for me, I really try to stress the importance of them taking that time for themselves on a schedule that works for them. Like, I have to model that in my own behavior, and I have to really support them when they set those guardrails for themselves.
Absolutely. But yeah, and I just want to go back to minimizing the athletic journey really quick, just to get that point in. But I know a lot of us, if we set that narrative that I'm not a good runner, so I don't have to prioritize this, it's easy to get in the habit of not reaching your goals, of not progressing as a runner. Zoe making a mental shift there to say, I am a good runner. I deserve to do this. I deserve to prioritize this as something that I enjoy. That helps her bring the balance between work and life and running to a better place. And so if we say, I'm not good enough, I don't deserve this, not only does that narrative make it more difficult to progress, but it's going to make it more difficult to prioritize things. So I would think about like those narratives that you're telling yourself. Again, try to relate them back to like, who do you want to be? What are your values? What do you want to prioritize? And also know that like, it's okay if these things shift a little bit depending on like what you have going on any given day. Sarah illustrated that, I think, really well in talking about kind of her road to her successful race over the weekend. And I think it's really important for athletes in the context of this question to ask yourself deeply about the goals you're setting for yourself. If you are in a difficult period of work, or you've got extra responsibilities at home, maybe setting yourself up with a goal that's more achievable, something that is going to allow you to do, a little bit less training, might be more advantageous to the process, especially the long-term process. If you put a 100-mile goal on the plan, but you've only got time to run 30 minutes a day, that's a problem. So we need to be really realistic with the goals that we set, as well as part of helping to maintain that balance and that flexibility. I've got some athletes who are really great at this. They recognize like the time of year where they're really busy, and they won't put any big goals on their plan during that time of year. And they'll email me like 6 months in advance. This time of year, I'm really busy. It's a big work push. Happens, like their awareness is strong. Like this happens every year. This is when like we need to work on speed, do lower volume training. And then, winter is really good for my long race. So I'm always going to do like a race in Hawaii that's 100 miles, because that's when I've got time. That's when I've got those 4 months to really train. And so those priorities, they're shifting in a small way, but in a very mindful, I think, and forward-looking way. And that's very helpful. I think there's this other part of the question about staying grounded in training and goals when things get challenging. That's just such an important piece to this as well. For me, again, it goes back to kind of like the narratives that we tell ourselves. When things are hard, do I have to run 10 miles when my mileage range is 8 to 10? No, I don't. 8 is fine. Even less if there's a particularly challenging day is great. Back to what Kylie, mentioned earlier, switching days around sometimes to help facilitate bringing up the quality, particularly like a workout day. This is something that when I was working in restaurants and having like a lot of really, really late nights that I would do with my coach, is like on a Wednesday, I was really tired from a long Tuesday night. I'd be like, hey, can I push this up one day? Today is my day off and I'm going to feel a lot better tomorrow as a result. And then I'd get more out of the workout. And so, you can stay grounded in your goals, but also be aware kind of some of the pitfalls in this process. If you don't feel like you're enough because you didn't get 10 miles in when your range is 8 to 10, that's something that you can internally that you need to work on with your coach, maybe work on with, a counselor or something like that. Because we kind of want to get to those root causes. So it can be easier for you to make that decision. Anyways, that's kind of my perspective on that. Give yourself a break. Don't write that story ahead of time. Would love to hear about maybe from Drew or from Kylie about, staying grounded even when things are hard. Or Sarah, who just popped back on. Sarah?
Yeah, I think there's like a couple, it's like, are we talking about, in the middle of a difficult run, or like in like, when you're injured in the middle of a training block and you had big goals for you, right? Like those are kind of two different things.
Totally.
So, thinking about like, if it's that second one where your goals get sidelined, or like there are some things outside of your control that impact your goals. And so now that journey that we wanted to be linear, or like just get us straight to, the finish line has these obstacles in the way. So first is just like knowing that that's the process for most people, and recognizing those obstacles. And like, I think that infinite mindset of stepping back and being like, this is just one little paragraph in my big story. And right now it feels like intense because it's the paragraph I'm reading, but like, it's just this little thing in the big story. And knowing that whatever's happening in this month and in this training block or whatever, good or bad, isn't the whole story, and things will, ebb and flow. So I think really trying to embrace some of those mindful attitudes, like patience and trusting the process and not striving, just like being in this present moment and where we're at, can be really helpful.
Something
And turning to your
helped-
people, your community. Sorry, Drew.
Yeah, no, that's great. Sorry for interrupting. I wanted to say something that kind of helps me is when things are going well and I'm running well and everything just seems like sunshine and rainbows, I have a really easy time of having a deeper, longer view. Like I can look at the month or the quarter and be like, man, everything, like I plan it all out. But I find it's helpful to me when I have a bad run or I have a bad week, is I really try to compartmentalize and be like, okay, this was one day, it's over. Like I'm done with it. Tomorrow's a new day. What can I do now to prepare myself to have a good day tomorrow? Or what can I do now to help myself prepare to have a good week next week? And just kind of mentally switching gears helps me stay grounded and not like, oh, well, this whole week's gone to shit. And how's that going to affect my goals in a negative way, and just spiraling out of control in a negative way. So that might be helpful to you as well.
Yeah, Drew, just to jump in really quickly, I think one of the concepts that you've consistently bring to these conversations is that idea of preparation. I think it's a really strong concept where you have a tough day, a day where things feel challenging in the training process. Maybe life's happenings are creeping in, kind of keeping you from doing the volume or getting the quality of training in that you would normally like to see yourself getting. Just taking that step back, zooming out and recognizing like what you can control. Okay, I can control like a lot of my preparation. Like tonight I can focus on getting in a good meal, getting that protein in. So, that can help with muscle repair. So that way tomorrow, what I'm able to do as a runner in my training is going to feel a little bit better. And that can help kind of turn that tide. When we really shift to those things that we can control, sleep, how we eat, getting in those little extra sessions of like PT, strength, foam rolling, that kind of stuff that like over time really adds up, keeps us healthy. When we consider that as preparation, that all those little habits lead us into the next day and set us up for success, we can kind of hopefully steer the ship, get into some smoother waters, get out of that kind of cycle of tough days. I love that concept. It's something that I never thought about considering. I call it recovery. You call it preparation. I think that that's super important. That's something that I got from you that like I'm always thinking about in the context of my training now. I think it's super strong. Yeah, Kylie, what do you think?
I feel like I don't have anything like earth-shattering to add to the conversation here. I don't know. I would just say we move to a next question.
Well, I did want to go back to Sarah then for 1 second. Sarah, you mentioned like trusting the process, and I think having that like that trust, that faith aspect, that like your journey is headed in the right direction, that you're surrounded by supportive people who have your best interests in mind, who are helping to guide you in that direction, that you're doing the right little things and that you've chosen the right path. All of that is like really, really important to cultivating an athletic life that full of like continual progression. And hopefully accomplishing some goals that are meaningful to you and things like that. I'm wondering like if an athlete's struggling to trust the process, what advice you might have?
Yeah. I think one thing is like looking back, and because sometimes it's hard for us to recognize our progress in the moment, and when we're looking to where we want to be, and sometimes it can be nice to like think about when you never had run before, or the first time you raced, and like really, how where you are now is a place you would have dreamed to have been, 1 year ago, 2 years ago, however long it would have been. Yeah. And just, realize, like really thinking about timelines and expectations, and looking at that why, and, just exploring a little bit about, why the expectations around the timeline are what they are, and can we shift those expectations in any way? And, really thinking about that, and trying to highlight other other like ways to identify progress, and other things to celebrate, and maybe other things to focus on.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. I think that can be really helpful. When you're struggling in the moment, dealing with an injury, dealing with some tough training, and you're not feeling like maybe you are progressing as tangibly as you'd like. It's hard to just take a breath and be like, I know things are happening behind the scenes at a cellular level. Like, I know that these investments are going to yield more tangible outcomes, like where I can actually feel like I've progressed. It's hard to trust that. I think for a lot of athletes, particularly like we get stuck in, as we talked about, in kind of like the finite and infinite game conversation, as humans, we want to feel like those results as soon as possible, right away. And I think that's especially true when things are hard. Like, we want to move through it really quickly. We almost expect that we can get through the tough feelings and the runs that don't feel good, and whatever life is throwing at us, we kind of expect to get through that quickly. At least I do. And so that's not always the case. I think for me, that looking back process that you mentioned can be super helpful, of just being like, 5 years ago, I was only running 5 miles. I couldn't run uphill. I ran the downs, but I never ran the ups. Like, I don't know, just like thinking about where you were before. And it's like, wow, now like I'm running like 10, 12 miles every day. Like, that's incredible. Like, even though I don't feel like progress is happening now, like, look at this tangible progress that has happened like over time. I think that it's super important for athletes. And we say this a lot, like when athletes are pushing back, when athletes are like not feeling like they're progressing as quickly as they, can. If I could guarantee, if I could just be like, hey, here's the timeline for your progression as an athlete. You're at day 1 at Microcosm, and by day 60, you will be running 730 miles. Like, it's not realistic to think about that, because we all are physiologically different. Like, our biology is different. We each have individual talents that sometimes take longer to express themselves in the context of running. And so like putting, timelines on this kind of stuff is really risky. So I would definitely recommend to athletes, like, wow, what's your expectation on like, why do you feel like you expect these things to happen now? Running is really a long-term process. And if it was like advantageous for us as a business to be like, you have to sign a 5-year contract because that's how long it's going to take to get better, I would absolutely do that, because I love it when athletes are bringing like that long-term zoomed out perspective, like Coach Drew mentioned earlier, to the table. Because when you're looking at things in those terms, I think it really starts to take the pressure off, rather than being like week to week progress, or training block to training block progress, or even race to race. Coach Drew, I know you had something you wanted to contribute.
Yeah, so just so we're all on the same page too, listening to Coach Sarah and TJ talk about looking back, it's such a useful tool being able to do that, but just don't get in the habit of looking back like a week from now or 2 weeks, be like, well, why am I not getting better? I've run every day every scheduled run for the last month, and I just don't feel like I've gotten a lot better in the last 30 days. That'd be like weighing yourself when you're on a, nutrition plan to lose weight, weighing yourself every 2 days. It doesn't work like that. Physiological adaptation, neurological adaptation, all this stuff takes time. And so you've heard Sarah and you heard TJ talk about a year ago or 5 years ago or whatever the deal is. So don't fall into the pitfall of only looking back to like, well, in January, I was running 6 miles at this pace, and now I'm still running 6 miles at this pace. Like, why aren't I getting better? It takes time. And oftentimes it takes a lot of time. So trying to be patient. And when you look back far.
Yeah, I'm reading this amazing book about Roger Federer. For those of you guys who don't know him, he is the greatest tennis player ever, one of the greatest athletes of all time, one of the most like some incredible longevity in a sport that normally athletes don't have longevity in. And when he was young, a lot of his coaches said he wasn't progressing fast enough. He wasn't on the same timeline as other champions. He's 20 years old. He hadn't won many ATP titles yet. He hadn't won any majors, hadn't won any gold medals at the Olympics, when his peers in the past had already won like multiple Grand Slams and things like that. And he had a lot of faith and trust in his coaching team, who had a very long-term vision for him and knew, based on his individual needs, it was going to take longer for him to progress to the level that they knew he was capable of. And even through all those setbacks, like the first 3 or 4 years of his career, he didn't win a lot of matches, lost a lot of tight matches. He stayed grounded in like trusting his team, his advisors, trusting that long-term vision and approach and cultivation for like his individual talents. And those obviously, a lot of people didn't think he was going to amount to anything. And for those of you who know him, he's amounted to quite something, which is pretty amazing. So everybody has their own individual timeline. We don't know when these things are going to click or happen. There are some like rough guideposts that we have, like around 500 days in the log, we tend to see some pretty big breakthroughs from athletes. But that's not always the case. So we don't want to like be beholden to like those expectations. We don't want to put those on ourselves. And I think it's especially important, like with what Coach Drew mentioned, like when you look back, like really look back. Don't judge yourself on like the last couple of weeks. You're making small investments every day that add up to really big things over larger amounts of time than probably like society and culture like really pushes us to believe. And so like really dream big. So you want the last word on this?
Yeah, I mean, something I've been thinking of a lot lately are like the recent American records set by Sarah Hall, Kira D'Amato, Camille Herron, like women in their late 30s who like started families, started careers, weren't necessarily like the best when they were running in college. And both Sarah Hall and Kira D'Amato, and actually even Camille Herron, kind of took steps after their collegiate running careers to just like do other stuff, right? But like Camille Herron just turned 40. This was her first race as a master, and she broke her own world record, right? Like something she had been chasing for over a decade. Like that's, if something really matters to you, there's no timeline, right? Like you will chase it until you get there, right? And like, it doesn't have to be an American record, obviously, but I think that like so often when I see athletes unwilling to take time with goals, what that says to me is this doesn't actually matter to you, because if it did, you would take that decade that you needed to do the thing, whatever it was, like you'll take that time. And like, that's what it takes to be not even just the best in the world, but like to be your best. Like this stuff takes years and years and years. And if you're not willing to give it years and years and years, then like my honest assessment is that your heart's not really in it. And that's okay. Like, we don't all love running the way that like Camille does, but like some of us do, like I do, like that. I identify with that. Like I want to spend a decade on my goals. I'm willing, like, I want to be, I want to be breaking records when I'm a master. Like that's what I'm trying to set myself up for right now. So like, what are you going to do today to be your best in a decade? Like, what do you care about today that you're willing to spend a decade working towards?
Oh man, yeah. Can we rewind that and play that again? I think it's so important. Zoe just said it so well. Gosh, and I love those illustrations of these kind of like quote unquote aging athletes just continuing to crush it. And so much of that is like, what are the stories that these women are telling themselves? Like the story is, I can still improve. I can still progress. I can still go after big goals. There is
2
no
years ago,
timeline.
Kira D'Amato didn't have a running sponsor. She was like emailing tracksmiths to get like free tank tops and shit. Doesn't care. Like she's out there being a real estate agent, training her ass off every single day, being a mom, working like a full-time job, and then deciding like, I'm going to break the American 10-mile record. I'm going to break the American, I'm going to set the American marathon record. And then like Sarah Hall also, like she adopted 4 kids from Ethiopia. Like she is a busy mom. And I remember she has this amazing piece in the New York Times where she reflected on like seeing her husband, Ryan Hall, break the American record. And she was like, it came so easy for him. And I knew it was going to be different for me. And she kept chasing it anyway. Like, even though her partner's story was one thing, she was like, fuck that. I'm telling my own story. It's a longer story, but like, I'm willing to see it through.
Yeah. And I think that, the best things are the things that are the most challenging, because that gives us so like that whole journey, so much color and context. And when you finally get to that finish line that you've been working, years for, that feeling of elation that you feel, it's about that whole cumulative journey. It's not just about that one race. Yeah. If you can rewind this, listen to what Zoe said, think about that, ruminate on that a little bit, because I think it's really important, and it really sums up kind of what all of us as coaches are trying to get athletes to understand. And especially in the context of like, how do we prioritize their goals? How do we stay grounded in our training when things are tough? How do we, work through difficult times? Yeah. Well, thank you guys. That was a really enjoyable call. We'll see you on Friday. Bye.